Truman's second thought that history never saw. The decision was already made. The world would only remember the first answer. But the second thought never stopped echoing. Harry Truman is remembered as decisive, firm, unflinching, the president who acted when history demanded clarity. But that version of Truman hides a quieter truth, one that unfolded not before the choice, but after it, because some doubts arrived too late to change outcomes, yet too early to disappear. When Truman entered the presidency, he inherited urgency without preparation. War was still raging. Millions were dying. Every option promised blood. He was not chosen for vision or theory. He was chosen by circumstance. And circumstance does not pause for reflection. The decision he made would end a war instantly. It would also redefine power forever. Truman understood the scale of it intellectually. But understanding is not the same as living with consequence. That part came later. In public, Truman stood firm. He framed the choice as necessary, as final, as the least destructive path available. The nation accepted that framing because it needed closure. History followed suit. The decision was recorded, categorized, justified. But leadership does not end when justification succeeds. In the days that followed, Truman began to experience something unexpected. Not regret in the dramatic sense, not reversal, but a quiet reconsideration that could not be shared. The awareness that necessity does not erase cost, that certainty does not eliminate moral residue. He read reports carefully, numbers, descriptions, effects. He absorbed them privately without commentary. No speeches followed, no revisions, but something had shifted. The decision was no longer theoretical. It had become permanent. This was Truman's second thought, the one history rarely captures. The recognition that ending suffering through overwhelming force creates a new kind of responsibility, one that does not belong to victory, but to stewardship. He could not undo what he had done. He could only decide what it would mean going forward. And in that space, between action and aftermath, Truman began to understand that leadership is not defined by the moment of decision alone. It is defined by how a leader lives with what cannot be taken back. That second thought settled in quietly and refused to leave. It followed Truman into every room of the presidency. As the war ended and celebration spread, Truman felt no release. The machinery of victory moved on, but his attention narrowed. He understood that the world had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Power had been redefined, and it now answered him. Briefings changed tone. The weapon was no longer an option. It was a presence. Advisors spoke of stockpiles, delivery systems, and deterrence. Truman listened with growing unease. The same force that ended one war now threatened to define every future one. This was where the second thought deepened. Truman realized that using the weapon again would not be another decision of necessity. It would be a choice of precedent. The first use had ended a war. The second would normalize annihilation. That distinction mattered more than strategy. Privately, Truman began drawing lines. He resisted pressure to treat the weapon as just another tool. He insisted on civilian control. He questioned military assumptions. The presidency shifted from executor to gatekeeper. The power he had unleashed now had to be contained. The emotional conflict intensified here. Truman believed in responsibility, not absolution. He did not deny the necessity of the original decision, but he refused to let necessity become habit. The second thought was not regret. It was resolve shaped by consequence. Publicly, Truman remained firm. He did not explain the hesitation behind the scenes. He understood that doubt, if exposed, could weaken deterrence. Leadership required absorbing uncertainty privately so stability could exist publicly. The presidency now lived under a shadow that never lifted. Every crisis carried the memory of what had already been done. Truman's second thought became a constant question. How much power is too much to ever use again? The answer would not come in words. It would come in restraint. The conflict reached its peak when restraint became policy, and policy demanded silence. As global tensions hardened, pressure mounted to normalize the power Truman had unleashed. Military planners argued for readiness. Strategists spoke of balance. Allies looked for reassurance. Rivals tested resolve. The weapon was no longer abstract. It was central to every calculation. Truman felt the weight of that centrality. He understood that the second use would define the future more than the first. The first had ended a war. The second would establish a world where annihilation was acceptable. That line could not be crossed casually or publicly debated. Inside the presidency, Truman held firm. He rejected proposals to deploy the weapon again. He resisted language that treated it as routine. He insisted on layers of approval, on delay, on restraint disguised as procedure. The system was built to slow decisions, not speed them. This was the emotional zenith of his story, not the moment of action, but the discipline of refusal. Truman was surrounded by advisors trained to prepare for use. He was the one person trained to prevent it. The presidency narrowed to a single responsibility, never again without absolute necessity. Privately, the second thought sharpened into conviction. The power he authorized once could not be allowed to define leadership permanently. He believed deterrence required credibility, but credibility did not require repetition. Silence became his shield. Restraint became his legacy. He did not announce this shift. He enacted it quietly. The world moved forward without realizing how close it stood to normalization. The absence of catastrophe became invisible success. The conflict did not resolve with certainty. It resolved with endurance. Truman lived with the second thought by turning it into policy. And policy, once set, outlasts doubt. The resolution came not with explanation, but with precedent. Truman left office knowing history would remember the act, not the restraint that followed it. The first decision was visible. The second was structural. He had transformed doubt into guardrails, ensuring that the power he unleashed would not be exercised lightly, casually, or automatically. This was the final shape of his leadership, not a reversal, but a boundary. Truman understood that authority is not proven by repetition. It is proven by refusal. The presidency after him would inherit a responsibility heavier than victory, the responsibility to say no even when saying yes felt easier. His story matters because it exposes a truth rarely acknowledged. Leadership does not end when the crisis passes. It begins in the aftermath, when consequences settle and the world expects consistency. Truman accepted that burden quietly. He did not seek forgiveness or praise. He sought containment. The second thought never appeared in speeches. It lived in procedures, norms, and expectations that shaped every future crisis. The absence of repetition became its own message, that some powers exist only to be restrained. That credibility can be built through patience rather than force. History often simplifies Truman as decisive alone, but his deeper legacy lies in what did not happen next, in the restraint that followed action, in the understanding that survival in a changed world required discipline more than dominance. The first decision changed history. The second thought protected its future. And in that quiet transformation, Truman redefined what responsibility looks like after power has already been used. Truman